Ich bin eigentlich Hotelunternehmer.
I'm a hotel manager by trade, but from a very young age, since I was about 15, I have caught the jazz bug, and it has never let go of me since. And this fascination for jazz was also the reason why I became a member of the Wolverines, an amateur jazz band that has been performing very actively for more than 50 years.
Jazzband in der Schweiz spielt und sehr aktiv ist. Aus dieser Band heraus ist dann der Wolverines Jazz Group entstanden.
It was the band that sparked the creation of the Wolverines Jazz Club in the mid-60s, which is important because that's where this jazz and blues ARTBOX really originates.
In
1974, my band, the Wolverines, was invited to a festival in Nice by George Wein, who is undoubtedly one of the world's most important jazz festival organizers, and that was an eye-opener to me. I met all the great jazz musicians and got the opportunity to play with a lot of these icons. This was when I decided to organize a jazz festival in Bern.
Und habe mich dann entschieden, in Bern ein Jazzfestival durchzuführen. Das Jazzfestival ist in einer Zeit entstanden.
The Jazz Festival came into being in a time when only the Montreux Jazz Festival had been active for some time. There were no festivals other than that. After talking to Claude Knops, the organizer of the Montreux Jazz Festival, I decided to organize the festival in Bern in May.
Während einer Woche in Bern durchzuführen. Das ist nicht ganz unwesentlich, weil
This is rather significant, because I didn't find out till later that May was a rather inappropriate date for organizing a jazz festival in Europe, because there would be no European tours of any top American artists during this time. They all toured around Europe in July, which is why they could easily be contracted for Montreux.
Natürlich so in Montreux einfach dann engagiert werden. Ich war immer verpflichtet, für diese Maiwoche
I was always forced to fly all the musicians I wanted to invite directly to Bern for this week in May, in order to be able to present top acts on stage who were anything but average. And this made all the difference to the Jazz and Blues ARTBOX, which features recordings that are in many respects extraordinary, as you will see later.
Sehr viel dazu beigetragen, dass wirklich die Aufnahmen in verschiedenster Hinsicht einzigartig sind. 1976 hatten wir das
Swiss Radio had been on board as early as from the first year in 1976. In the second year, however, I decided to engineer the sound independently and hired one of the best sound engineers who would then deliver the sound to Swiss Radio and later also to Swiss television, another fact that is eminent for the quality of this jazz and blues ARTBOX.
Der Aufwand für dieses Festival durchzuführen.
The expenditure in terms of time and money for organizing the festival has constantly increased in view of growing demands both from myself and from the audience. We have tried to enhance the level of quality year by year, and especially to bring really unique combinations onto the stage.
Kombinationen auf die Bühne zu bringen. Und der Aufwand war insofern schwieriger geworden, weil
what proved especially difficult was the fact that top acts like Ella Fitzgerald or B.B. King or Oscar Peterson or Fats Domino weren't prepared to fly to Bern for only one concert. That's why I was obliged to find additional opportunities for these bands to perform in Switzerland. And I always succeeded, but as mentioned before, the expense in time and money was considerable.
War extrem hoch.
For this reason, I was extremely open or even thrilled when two representatives of Swiss television approached me. It was Werner Kagi and Kurt Gfeller, who had heard about our festival in Bern and had the intention of doing a trial recording of the 1983 edition in order to see what the festival would look like on television.
Um zu sehen, wie sich das dann im Fernsehen präsentiert. Die Aufnahmen waren wirklich grandios und dann ist eine Zusammenarbeit entstanden.
The recordings were superb and marked the beginning of a cooperation with Swiss television that considerably contributed to the high quality of this ARTBOX. Head of Swiss television Peter Schellenberg internally decided to record the Bern Jazz Festival each year and to define it as an in-house production, which meant that Swiss television made sure to allocate optimum means in terms of staff and technology.
Personeller Art und auch technischer Art zur Verfügung stellte.
I took all this for granted at that time, but I have come to realize that it really wasn't self-evident from today's perspective. The festival was then recorded every year and, what was really interesting, it was always done with the exact same team. From the cameraman to the director, all these top professionals exerted themselves each year to be deployed to Bern again.
Darum bemüht, wiederum nach Bern entsandt zu werden. Somit ist auch hier eine Konsistenz.
So, as far as the recording is concerned, there is also great consistency throughout the project. And it was done by people who really cared about the quality of music and the cultural presentation of these jazz and blues artists, rather than using the kind of gimmicks that can very often be seen in pop clips today.
Dann ist eine Entwicklung entstanden.
As time evolved, the jazz musicians of the first generation successively became unavailable. They were getting on in years or even died, and the younger generation just didn't manage, not even today, to follow in the footsteps of those extraordinary musicians or to reach that degree of celebrity.
Ich habe dann 2003 entschieden, das Konzept zu ändern.
In 2003, I decided to change the concept by bringing jazz back to the roots, which means into this club, Marion's Jazz Room. This also raised the question of television recordings, so I met Peter Schellenberg for lunch in Zurich, where he disclosed to me that he was getting retired. I asked him more or less in passing what was to become of all the recordings made in Bern and whether he would archive them. The answer was, with thousands of recordings per day at Swiss television, I just can't archive everything, and it's absolutely unthinkable to digitize everything. At that time, digi-beta tapes had been the measure of all things, but I managed to convince him to at least have a thought about digitizing the most important recordings of the Bern Jazz Festival.
Nachdenkt darüber, die wichtigsten Aufnahmen des Berner Jazz Festivals sicherzustellen. Die nächste Frage war natürlich, wer entscheidet, was sind wichtige Aufnahmen?
The next question was who would decide about what were important recordings. I offered my services, went to the studio in Zurich and spent 2.5 weeks from 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night viewing those tapes. And, I have to admit, that was an incredible eye-opener. When organizing a festival like I did and still do, you never get the chance of seeing all the artists perform on stage. I didn't witness a single concert as part of the audience, only heard small excerpts, but not more. And then I came to the studio and realized what an enormous amount of material there was. I knew that all the musicians had delivered top performances. They had been very motivated and enjoyed the relaxed atmosphere. But I realized now that the sound and especially the video recordings were of exceptional quality. And thus, the result of this viewing in Zurich was that I defined 240 concerts to be archived.
Von denen ich gesagt habe, die sollten wir archivieren. Für mich war damals mit dieser Aktion eigentlich das Ziel erreicht. Ich hatte keine weiteren Hintergedanken.
My goal had been achieved by completing this task, and I didn't have any ulterior motives. In the same year, however, a company from Hamburg contacted me because they had heard that there were recordings from Bern. They showed great interest in publishing these recordings, which I refused because we had had only limited television rights from these artists and fully exploited them. In other words, the musicians had the rights to the music as such. I had the rights as a producer, and Swiss Television, of course, had the rights to the pictures.
Musik als solches, ich gegebenenfalls als Produzent und der Schweizer Fernsehen mit Sicherheit an den Bildern. Sie haben insistiert und irgendwann mal habe ich nachgegeben und wir haben...
They insisted and eventually I gave in. We made an agreement which was implemented, and in 2004 I began to obtain the rights of these musicians. That was quite a challenge, as the project comprised 738 contracts, which I all prepared myself. I also negotiated the transfer of the DVD rights for these recordings, together with Swiss Television, and signed a contract.
DVD-Rechte für diese Aufnahmen verhandelt und einen Vertrag abgeschlossen. Weil das für mich Neuland war, habe ich wiederum George Wein.
I was entering new territory here, so I contacted George Wein, who had become a good friend of mine, and asked him for help. He brought me in contact with Hank O'Neill, who is an incredibly versatile person, a renowned photographer, the founder of Chiaroscuro Records, with which he recorded over 200 LPs. He organized the Jazz Festival on Sea, with partly the same musicians as I had engaged, and he has published more than 20 books.
Langspielplatten aufgenommen. Hat das Jazz Festival on Sea hat durchgeführt, mit zum Teil den gleichen Musikern, die ich auch hatte am Festival, und hat über 20 Bücher veröffentlicht. He in turn introduced me to a DVD producer and attorney from New York. I met him and we elaborated a contract together. Once the contract was wrapped up, it was time to compile the collection. It had always been clear to me that this was going to be a collection, which means that all recordings we acquired directly were to be brought to the market as a whole in a limited edition of 5,000 pieces. In einer limitierten Auflage von 5,000 Stück.
And 3 years ago, in 2012, I decided to take charge of things myself and found a variety of good friends and investors who were thrilled about the project. With the help of these people, the Jazz and Blues ARTBOX could finally be realized.
Was ist nun diese Jazz and Blues ARTBOX?
So, what is this Jazz and Blues ARTBOX all about in detail? It comprises 230 concerts that were left in their original state as performed on the stage. So none of these concerts have been modified in any respect. The box also contains about 96 interviews with all of the major jazz icons who form part of this compilation. There's Oscar Peterson, Amal Jamal, George Wein as a producer and musician, and there's also Horace Silver, Sonny Rollins, and so on. They were all interviewed by a journalist of Swiss Television, who himself was a jazz musician and band leader, and therefore was in a position to ask interesting questions and get very interesting answers from all of these musicians. So this collection of interviews, which are added to the DVDs in the form of bonus tracks, really represents jazz history itself.
Nothing takes the place of music with me, Peter. That's my first and foremost love, and so I expect to do that the way I would like to do it. I expect that.
Hi, my name is Wynton Marcellus, and I'm a jazz musician. And the main thing I want to tell the young musicians is that if you decide to be a musician and you really get serious about it, you'll never be alone. But now to be a musician, that means that it requires first years of practice.
To me, this Bern Festival is a real trial. I mean, one night I'm on with Ahmed Jamal, the other piano player, and last night I was on with Michel Camillo as the other piano player. I like the way I say the other piano player. And tomorrow night I have Ralph Sutton, you know what I mean? So, I mean, you know, lots of luck, you know what I mean? And I consider that it's a privilege for me to even be here, so...
In the course of obtaining all the rights, I realized that recordings of such quality and such consistency from these times were unique worldwide. And this was also confirmed by George Wein and later by Wynton Marsalis, who wrote the preface to the book, which also forms part of this compilation. So it really is a collection of historical value. That's why I like to call it a piece of art rather than a music production.
Ich spreche auch hier von diesem Kunstwerk, eben von einem Kunstwerk und nicht von einer Musikproduktion. Als wir alles beisammen hatten,
when the compilation was finished, it needed to be designed and packaged, and it was clear to me that this all had to be done on the same top level as the music on the one hand, but also the technical production on the other.
Produktion her gemacht sind oder vorhanden sind.
And in the person of Roger Pfund, I found an internationally renowned graphic designer. He had designed the Swiss passport and the Red Cross Museum in Geneva and is from Bern himself, but went to Geneva where he gained international success.
Und hat dann ein Konzept gemacht und gesagt,
Roger Pfund drew up a concept and suggested that we keep everything in chronological order. So it's 20 years from 1983 to 2002, and there are as many DVDs as there have been concerts, since that was different from year to year. Also, there is a yearbook for each year. Of course, these texts for the yearbook first had to be created. And for this job, I was able to commit Peter Bölke, a former top business journalist for The Spiegel, jazz fan and author of 4 jazz books. He created all the texts, later in cooperation with Hank O'Neill.
Diese Texte in Zusammenarbeit dann später mit Hank O'Neill gemacht.
And on top of all that, we made the effort to create screenshots from the recordings. In fact, we took 6 to 7 photos of each production, each concert, and edited them. The yearbooks are thus complemented with wonderful live photos of all these artists over the entire 20 years.
Ergänzt durch wunderbare Live-Aufnahmen dieser Künstler, und zwar durch die ganzen 20 Jahre. Roger Pfund hat dann auch ein Konzept gemacht, wie man das verpacken kann, indem gesagt hat,
Roger Pfund then came up with an idea for final packaging in the form of a piece of furniture, a small cabinet where all the 230 DVDs, the 20 yearbooks plus the big book would fit. However, we soon abandoned this idea, since we're not furniture producers. Creating and producing a special cabinet for a compilation of 5,000 pieces that would last for 2 or 3 generations was a requirement we couldn't meet.
Bestand hält, das ist ein Anspruch, den wir nicht erfüllen konnten.
Here's old Clock Cherry sitting over here. You don't have your trumpet tonight, will you? Clock Cherry, ladies and gentlemen. You all know Clock Cherry. Clock Cherry. Nice to see you. The shore was kissed by a sea of mist tenderly.
Einer meiner Investoren hat mir dann gesagt,
one of my investors then told me, it's all very simple, Hans. What I really want is that these DVDs, the yearbooks and the big book can be inserted and kept in my USM furniture. That was the reason why I then contacted the owner of the USM furniture factory, Alex Scher, whose company is located in Münsingen near Bern. It didn't take long to convince him about our project, and he offered to adapt one of his cupboards for the collection using the design by Roger Pfund.
Diese Collection in eines seiner Möbel, das umgebaut wurde und veredelt durch das Design von Roger Pfund, dass das so auf den Markt kommt.
This piece of art, or in other words, the 230 DVDs, the 20 yearbooks and the big book, stored in this tailor-made art box by USM, is really made to last for the next generations to come. It's robust, it's of superior quality, and it has been designed for jazz enthusiasts from all over the world.
Jazz-Enthusiasten auf der ganzen Welt.
By the way, it's numbered and signed in a limited edition of 5,000, and it's also very interesting for art collectors or universities or jazz schools as a showpiece for visual instruction.
Den Jazzschülern quasi als Anschauungsunterricht zur Verfügung stellen können.